Shukam. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third panel discussion of the North Country Art, Land, and Environment Summit. The topic of this panel is environmental justice in the North Country. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee peoples, specifically the Kaniatarawanénhne Mohawk. In addition, those of us who are part of this colonial society acknowledge our role as settlers on this territory, honoring those who have stewarded this land for time immemorial.
We also want to acknowledge our own position as organizers of this summit. My name is Aguilar-Izzo.
And my name is Blake Lavia.
I come and grew up in Guanajuato, Mexico, Otomí, Chichimeca, Purépecha territory. I come to this land as a settler.
While I also come to this land as a settler from the country that since 1861 has been known as the modern nation of Italy.
To begin this conversation, we wanted to show you a map that to many may seem unfamiliar. That is because we have been taught a specific type of geography in schools. We have been taught a settler colonial geography, a geography that was imposed on the land violently through genocide, through conquest. The riverways you see on this map have been exploited, have been dammed by a settler colonial society. The place names that you see on this map have been in many cases attemptedly erased, again, by the settler colonial society. The settler colonial society placed its own borders, its own names on these maps. It divided communities, cut land apart through borders, through private property. Again, in talking about this story, the story of environmental justice in the North Country, Haudenosaunee Territory, we must first undo these histories and begin to analyze and discuss the stories that lay underneath. So to situate you all, we want to reference the land and water that where we now stand. The water that flows by us is from the Nigenzage, the Grass River. It flows to its confluence with the Kaniatarowanénhne, and again, forgive my pronunciation, the St. Lawrence River. The connection between the Grass and the St. Lawrence is one of the most polluted, or was one of the most polluted sites on Turtle Island, what people call the United States of America or the American continent. These stories of violence, of conquest, we will explore today in discussing this land and this territory. So without further ado,
we would like, on behalf of the North Country Art, Land, and Environment, we want to thank all our collaborating partners, the people, the organizations, and the land and the water who have made this summit possible. This program was founded by Humanities New York with the support of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the St. Lawrence Art Collaborative Grant, and the Richard F. Grush Gallery. We would also like to thank North Country Public Radio for being our media sponsor, and the Web News for hosting us tonight. The special panel is happening in tandem with the Water and Origin, honoring the first storyteller exhibition, and the Grass Talk virtual exhibition. And finally, we will pass you to our moderator, Agnes Williams.
Greetings and Thanksgiving. First of all, I'd like to extend a greetings and Thanksgiving to the Wings Collective, the panelists, and our audience today for this discussion on environmental justice in the North Country. My name is Agnes Williams. I'm a Seneca grandmother, mother, sister, and auntie from the Cattaraugus Territory of the Seneca Nation of Indians near Irving, New York, in the western part of the state. I'm your moderator for tonight's discussion. And in the context of the Doctrine of Discovery, United States of America law rooted in the 15th century European papal bulls is the foundation of notions of white supremacy and Christian domination that not only enslaved Black Africans, but destroyed Native lives and North American environments. We are survivors of a 500+ year American Holocaust of communicable diseases like smallpox, and now again, COVID-19. War with its subsequent rape of our mother, the earth, and rape of missing and murdered, disappeared Native women. Removal off of our original territories and subsequent loss of our food sources. Relocation onto reservations and into abusive boarding schools, then into industrially polluted cities. Our lands are designated by the federal government of the United States with a policy called National Sacrifice Areas, where extractive mining and technologies, as well as industrial waste, have rendered them uninhabitable, unsafe, and unhealthy. Today, once again, we witness the justice in America, or the just us, as the Native legacy of the late Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg in her 2007 decision against the Oneida land claims versus the town of Sherrill here in New York. Ginsburg used the Doctrine of Discovery as a justification for her written decision regarding the Oneidas and ignored the United States treaty laws with the Oneida and the Haudenosaunee in the 1784 Canandaigua Treaty. The development of the first and the second world is dependent upon the underdevelopment of the third world for the workers, and no development in the fourth world, indigenous peoples. Where our natural resources are exploited and dumping of industrial waste have occurred. The Haudenosaunee continue to suffer the consequences of the mid-20th century industrial attacks at Seneca, Tuscarora, Onondaga from nuclear development and waste disposal. Added to that, in Mohawk North Country, General Motors and other industries have dumped heavy metals in the St. Lawrence River, and Native peoples stopped in the St. Lawrence River. Native people stopped going extinct in 1900. We only have over 100 years of physical recovery. And by the mid 1900s, the Haudenosaunee experienced industrial attacks on several of our communities. And this was not a coincidence. It all happened in mid-century. We are here to discuss the environmental injustices in the Mohawk North Country region and its impact on everyone. Today, we will hear presentations from 4 distinguished colleagues, Gaia D. Dukia, or Jackie Hill, Craig Arquette, both from Haudenosaunee Territory near Messina, New York, Stephanie Morningside, Oneida from the Land Trust. You're invited to ask questions in the Zoom and YouTube chat rooms. Your questions will be compiled, after which I will direct each of our panelists to answer them. We will begin with Jackie Hall. Please continue.
Segos Ganagoga, Gaiti Dake Yungats, Wagatahuni. My name is Jackie Hall. I'm Wolf Clan and I'm Mohawk from Akwesasne. I've been a reporter here for several years in Akwesasne, and I'm also an activist. I chose to read a particular article that I wrote a few months back. I did a series of editorials called How a Pandemic Changed Akwesasne. And this particular article I wrote was a result of becoming aware that the St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Council canceled the meeting that would have informed Akwesasne that the EPA made changes to their plan for the Grass River cleanup, last minute changes to dredge more of the Grass River and expose us to more PCBs. So I decided to write this editorial. I'm gonna just share a visual of the area I'm talking about. Okay. So here, I'm particularly talking about the Grass River here in this area and how it affects Akwesasne. How a Pandemic Changed Akwesasne by Jacqueline Hall. It seems as though the majority of Akwesasne are getting back to the land with the encouragement of multiple organizations who have been distributing free seeds, samplings, plants, and supplies to create raised bed gardens. While it has become commonplace to see raised bed gardens all throughout Akwesasne, it seems as though many have forgotten why raised beds became a necessity in Akwesasne and why it is an important part of our history. It was not so long ago when our Dudas could sustain themselves completely off the land here in Akwesasne. There was a time our Dudas could fish in the river, hunt on the land, and grow food without worrying about the impact these locally caught and grown foods could have on the people and the future generations. That time has long passed. With multiple environmental genocides having taken place in Akwesasne in the past 120 years, our people have had to continuously adapt and innovate to continue to live off the land. Throughout all of the change and impacts felt by our people, our resilience as Ngwahuma people and adherence to our original teachings have persevered. Heavy industry has existed near Akwesasne since the early years of the 20th century. The Aluminum Company of America, the area's first large-scale industrial plant, opened in Messina, 8 miles west of Akwesasne during 1903. The opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959 caused large-scale industrialization and attendant pollution on or near the Akwesasne Reservation. Reynolds Metals built an aluminum reduction plant less than a mile from Akwesasne the same year the Seaway opened. By 1962, cattle on Cornwall Island, also known as Gawanoge, were dying of fluoride poisoning. The effects of pollution at Akwesasne are evidenced by a decline in the number of people earning a living as farmers and fishermen in the area. In 1930, Akwesasne was the site of 129 commercial farms. In 1990, the figure was 19. According to figures obtained by Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, the estimated number of fishermen declined from 104 to 11 during the same period. This is an excerpt from the Encyclopedia of the Haudenosaunee. Surely these statistics have changed since this excerpt was written. With the efforts of projects and organizations such as SAG Tawado, Akwesasne Cultural Center, Three Sisters Sovereignty Project, Ungwe, Thompson Island, Women's Wisdom Circle, and individual knowledge keepers hosting workshops aimed at teaching Akwesasne self-sufficiency. Many have gone forward with learning and getting back to the land. With all of the newfound knowledge comes a newfound responsibility to take it a step further than being a caretaker of the land, but to be a land defender. Caretaking takes on a whole different realm than defending land, but both are equally important during these times, especially when we find ourselves coming back to the land to sustain ourselves and our families. With the travel restrictions put in place during this pandemic, many feel as if they have no choice but to hunt, gather, and garden within a 50-mile radius. But is it really the best thing for our people? We have to outweigh the pros and cons of remaining within an area 24/7 that is ultimately making our people sick. Although it does not come in the form of a cold or coronavirus for that matter, the deep-rooted disease that has been continuously passed on unknowingly to our future generations has repercussions that are long-lasting. Many people believe they drink because they drink bottled water purchase food grown elsewhere, and garden and raise beds that they are not as affected by this deep-rooted disease given to us from industry. Sorry to remind people, but the water we use, the air we breathe, and the land we live on make up who we are. We are only as healthy as the land we call home, and our future generations' health depends on us. Heavy metals such as PCBs only leave our bodies through breast milk or semen, so the only way we can rid ourselves of this poison is by passing it on to our children. Many Akwesasne are aware of the Grass River cleanup taking place as we speak. The dredging of the Grass River is stirring up sediments of the past and unleashing the same poisons that made living beings sick in the past. Although representatives of these industries assure us they are going about it as safely as possible, there is a low risk of exposure to Akwesasne. There is still a risk that government and industry deem low, but the involvement and consultation of Akwesasne on this possible risk was at a minimum. For example, one of EPA's most recent announcements regarding the Grass River cleanup, made on April 15th, 2020, states the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has modified a plan to address sediment contaminated with PCBs at the Grass River Superfund site in Messina, New York. The EPA continues to listen closely and respond to the needs of this community as a priority. And we are working hard with our state and tribal partners to advance the cleanup of this critically important river system, said EPA Regional Administrator Pete Lopez. The modification to the plan will provide for the removal of more sediment and will ensure that the new tugboat can operate efficiently and effectively, all while remaining on track with the project. A change in plans for the Grass River cleanup includes dredging and removing an extra 90,000 cubic tons, only 0.3 miles away from the St. Lawrence River and scarily close to the water treatment plant on Gowanoge. When the EPA makes these plans, it does not include the Canadian side of the border or how it could affect the north side of the river. There was no prior consultation or information shared because of this ongoing pandemic. The previous Grass River information session in Akwesasne was canceled. This extra dredging and removal to accommodate a bigger tugboat could have very well went unnoticed due to this pandemic. These plans to dig up and change our rivers for the convenience of a project is only a miniature version of what took place during the construction of the seaway. There was clearly impacts on our people when the seaway was built, so one can only guess what the impacts will be from this invasive project. Going into this year's gardening and gathering season, we must be aware of the different risks and impacts that it may have on our people, the closer we are to these industrial sites. While well-meaning knowledge keepers suggest locations to gather and hunt that are within the suggested 50-mile radius, it is our responsibility to remind the people of our land's living history and continue to pass on this knowledge so long as our lands and waters are sick. Stay vigilant and research information for yourself during this pandemic, especially when it comes to our land and water. To have a healthy relationship with our Mother Earth, we must reconcile with her and help her to heal. How can we do that while at the same time depending on her for nourishment? That's the end of the editorial that I wrote. Did I use up all my time?
No, that was very good. Thank you. Our next presenter will be Craig Arquette, who is an Akwesasne Mohawk.
My name is Craig Arquette, Mohawk from Akwesasne, and I'm going to be starting my presentation here. Let me pull it up. Are you able to see it?
Environmental justice, yes.
Okay. First, I just want to just pull up a map of Akwesasne, of where we're located. We're in upstate New York. Our territory is in upstate New York and extends into the Canadian provinces of Quebec and Ontario. And I'm going to be talking about the industries and the contamination that they've caused in and around Akwesasne. In Akwesasne, we have a number of health issues, and these include diabetes and various cancers. There are several other health issues on a long list, but these are the two main ones that get talked about the most. And over the last couple of years, our community has faced a lot of cancers. And that's because we've been exposed to the contaminants for about 60 years now. And that really is a lifetime of exposures to contaminants. And that's why we're seeing a lot more cancers now. And in this map, I just wanted to show how close the industries are. And this is just showing the western side of Akwesasne, and around the edge, we have the General Motors Superfund site. And then on the opposite side of the General Motors site is the Reynolds Metals plant, which is now in a co-op plant. But from there, about 7 miles upstream in the town of Messina is the co-op plant, and that was started operation in 1903, and both the Reynolds and the GM plant, they were in operation in 1960. And to the north, in the city of Cornwall, there were about 7 factories there, but they don't exist now. And these facilities, these industries, they've released a lot of contaminants in and around Akwesasne. And these have been PCBs, PAHs, phenols, fluoride, and mercury. Mercury contamination mainly came from the Canadian factories near Cornwall, and fluoride that mainly was in the form of air contamination from the Reynolds plant, and PCBs, PAHs, and phenols, that's mainly from the Alcoa and GM plant. And so our community's has these industries around us. So we have to think about, all right, why are they even here in the first place? And in this map, I guess I love showing maps. This one, I just want to show how close everything is to us. And in the bottom right corner is Akwesasne. And you see the Cornwall Island, that's in our territory. But below that, you see 2 facilities of, you have the GM plant in Reynolds, but also on the map, you see labeled the Robert Moses Power Dam. And that's what the Power Dam, St. Lawrence Seaway, construction was finished about 1958. And then immediately after, both the Reynolds and GM plant started construction, and they were both in operation by 1960. And you can see that the Reynolds and GM plant, they weren't near Messina. They were located right up against Akwesasne. And at the GM plant, as soon as they were in operation, they started dumping their waste onto their property, and they didn't select it in an isolated area. They put it right furthest away from their facility, right on our doorstep. In this picture, I'm standing on top of the GM dump, and I'm looking towards Akwesasne. At the bottom of the dump, that water feature you see there, that's a cove that connects to the St. Lawrence River. And in those, and on the left-hand side of the picture, you see some buildings with the red roof. Those are apartments, and you can see how close they are to those apartments are on tribal lands. So you can see how close this GM dump is to Akwesasne. And I should probably note that when the GM dump was first being created in the 1960s, those structures probably weren't there. But on the high ground, in the picture in the trees, you see some buildings there. Those are houses, and those houses were always there. There were always people living in that area. So you can still see how close everything is. And this cove was it was contaminated from the GM site. It has been cleaned up now. And upstream of this cove, there's a beaver pond and wetlands, and that's also contaminated. That was contaminated from spills and contaminants migrating onto tribal property. The wetlands and the beaver pond are on tribal lands. And I guess that was, so there was kind of two things that were really bothered our community. Was first at the Robert Moses power dam brought in these industries with the cheap power, but Akwesasne, we never benefited from that. And even to this day, we still haven't. The town of Messina, they benefit from it, the industries. And the fact that they were set up right on our doorstep, exposing us to the contamination. And I guess the third issue or event that our community disliked was the GM bankruptcy. 2009, General Motors Corporation filed for bankruptcy, and they came out of bankruptcy by 2011. And out of that bankruptcy, the Racer Trust was formed to manage the properties that GM abandoned. GM got rid of all the properties that were contaminated or costing them money. That was about 28 properties. And so they're out of the picture. They got away with it. You know, it's not only is it not fair, but that's just not right. And they got away with it, the General Motors. Racer Trust, their mandate is to finish the cleanup of the properties and to sell them. Their Racer Trust is working under a fixed budget. If we still had General Motors in the picture, we would have had at least a chance to keep pressuring them to do more with the cleanups. But that's not the case now. It's just difficult to get more work done. So I guess we've been kind of beaten up over the years, but we also had some successes too. And these successes go back to the beginning. In 1985, a Mohawk midwife gets New York State DEC involved. In those early years, the agencies were involved, the state and EPA, but they were mostly focused on the industries, that the footprint of the facilities themselves. They really weren't looking at the needs of the community. So this one individual goes to Albany, goes to the DEC's wildlife pathologist, explains to him that she's seeing a lot of health issues in Akwesasne, and she gets him to come to Akwesasne and to take a look for himself and to collect samples. And in his mind, the pathologist wanted to just, he just figured, oh, this is another person that's making, exaggerating what's going on. I'll go take a look, collect samples, and be done with it, close the book. But he saw it for himself. Visible contamination in Akwesasne on our lands, and he collected samples, and that verified what he was seeing. And that was just kind of the start of getting acknowledgement that the community was impacted. That did take some convincing and work. And then another success was in 1990 when A small success was when the record of decision for the GM site was issued. Record of decision is just a document describing how the properties were going to be cleaned up, and the tribe had set up our own cleanup levels of what we think are protective, and there were for our lands. Like I said, contamination had spilled over into reservation lands, so we'd set standards on how those lands would be cleaned up. And in this record of decision, they adopted our standard of cleanup for tribal property. And for example, on the GM property, the cleanup of soils was 10 parts per million. Cleanup of soils on reservation was 1 part per million. And in 1995, General Motors proposed to make some changes to the record of decision. There were 2 record of decisions for the General Motors site, and they were just one dealt with one part of property and another one dealt with a second part of property. And they both had different cleanup levels for each of their sections. For example, one part of property was to be cleaned up to 500 parts per million, and the other part was to 10 parts per million. General Motors wanted to make them equal, bring them both decisions to the same cleanup level of 500 parts per million. EPA issued a release of the proposed changes, and our community responded in a big way. We held meetings, we had protests, and then we had massive letter writing campaigns to EPA. And result of that effort, that EPA dropped the proposed changes and left it the same, of keeping that one section to 10 part per million. So I guess the point I'm making here is, one individual, took it upon herself to do something, and she spoke to the right person who was motivated to do something on our behalf. And then and the other is that when our community can come together, we can do some really, really great things. And that's kind of but what I have to talk about. So I'll be ending.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next presenter is Stephanie Morningstar, and she's with the Land Trust.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Morningstar. I'm Oneida Turtle Clan. I'm the executive director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And I'm here today to talk about the ways that we're addressing environmental contamination in our communities, including the communities of our Indigenous partners and relatives. Before we start, I just wanted to briefly frame the reason that I chose to do the work that I do. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. My mother was Oneida, and my family is from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. My mother was a legacy residential school survivor, and carried with her a deep level of intergenerational trauma that really affected her health. And it started making me think after her death in 2010 about the ways that she may have survived if she had not experienced the health issues that she experienced. Part of the way that I guess dealt with that was by joining a team of healthcare professionals and starting a clinic on Six Nations called Judah's Place, in partnership with a faith keeper and a medicine helper, as well as a Mohawk doctor. And that was sort of the beginning or the initiation for me into seeing the direct effects of environmental contamination on our people. I wanted to be able to figure out a way to help solve this. And what I found was that it was the extractive nature of the way that the land and our waters have been treated, and the carelessness for which those relatives have been treated over the years, and having that direct correlation of climate change and environmental contamination correlating along with colonized ways of being, doing, and knowing. 10 years, 11 years later, here I am with you, the executive director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. I had a long journey along the way. I'm an herbalist. I work with BIPOC populations specifically. So I work with people of color mainly, and uplift and celebrate indigenous ways of knowing and decolonial frames for herbal medicine. So it's all about working with the land and really honoring and respecting the land. So moving on, this is a picture of our network during a network gathering last year. And you can see we're all sorts of people of color from all over the globe, really focusing specifically on global indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing. Our goal is to create land sovereignty and advance land sovereignty through the development of a community land trust and a conservation land trust. So basically a hybrid between two types of land trusts that really recognizes that our global indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing, specifically with regenerative agriculture and the ways that we approach environmental stewardship, should be central to the tenets of how we develop our relationships with land, with one another, and specifically around centering the sovereignty of indigenous nations across the Northeast and across Turtle Island. So our vision is to advance land sovereignty in the Northeast region through permanent and secure land tenure for Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and Asian farmers and land stewards who will work with the land in a sacred manner that honors our ancestors' dreams for sustainable farming, human habitat, ceremony, native ecosystem restoration, and cultural preservation. What makes us unique is our hybrid land trust model. So we're working with a community land trust model that addresses all of the sort of basic farming needs and feeding our communities and living situations, and blending that with this conservation land trust model that is specific to some of the issues we're speaking to today regarding conservation and restoration of our waterways, our native species ecosystems, specifically also culturally significant lands, burial grounds, places to do rites of passage, as well as just making land healthy again for hunting, harvesting, growing food in the ground, ceremony, and again, reburial. And really what that's supposed to equal, these two hybrid approaches, is to equate to or manifest health, wealth, and joy in our communities. So creating or reinstituting healthy, permanently accessible land, connecting folks with being able to grow food and medicine in the ground again. It's really hard to hear folks having to do a raised bed gardening, and knowing that that may be a cultural thing, but it's also for a reason. So being able to grow soil and build soil again, the joyful honoring of our cultural lifeways, honor homelands, to address native species ecosystem restoration, and to regard invasive species as settler species that can also work with us to bring health and wealth to our communities, as well as building a new economic system that reclaims, builds, and shares wealth. And a big approach for us is regenerative agriculture, specifically in the soil or the carbon sequestration that we're aiming to achieve through regenerative agriculture. And ultimately, what we are approaching is to look at creation, so something that we are a part of, creation or nature, as something that is also a living being. So a huge part of our work, as I'll talk about in a moment, is regarding the rights of nature and personhood. This is a model of our land trust and our programs for the inaugural phase of our emergence from the soil that we've been building over the last 2 years together. We focused on governance development. We focused on recognizing our place and our situation as stewards of the land. And we've found that there's 3 approaches that we need to take that are all overlapping that will result in manifesting the vision of the land trust. And that would be to connect folks to land and also to defend the land, as well as cultivating the resources in order to be able to get those folks on land. One of the key tenets of our work that we're doing is, in our approach, is that we're not just consulting with Indigenous people. I mean, I'm Indigenous myself, and this is an Indigenous-led initiative, but recognizing the multitudes of nations across the northeast part of Turtle Island whose lands have been stolen from them. So really understanding treaties and understanding unceded territory and what that actually means. So, you know, looking at the timeline of colonization and the timeline of contact, and what the environment looked like before and what the environment looks like now, we can see that we are in a deep crisis that has taken 200 years to make happen, basically. So we're looking at not being able to reverse that crisis, but we need to build resilience in our communities to address that crisis and now deal with it because we're living in it. So that's what the Land Trust is all about. It's about getting folks onto land who need to grow food and medicines for their communities in order to survive. We don't want to be reliant on bottled water. We don't want to be reliant on food that we need to purchase from a grocery store. We don't want to be involved in the capitalist extractive system that has basically created the system and the issue that we're all dealing with right now. So the approaches that make us unique from other land trusts are that we're really looking at the root causes of issues. The fact that Indigenous hands have not been stewarding the land and that there have been no trespassing signs placed on land that is our homelands and our unceded territories is a shame. And one of the ways that we're trying to approach that is through looking at the systems that created that. We are 100% BIPOC led and driven. I am the executive director. We have 2 other co-directors joining us, and we have members, Indigenous community members and Black folks on our board of directors. Again, we're mainly looking at not just consultation with Indigenous communities, but specifically partnerships with Indigenous communities. And we're just beginning this process now. We've been kind of internal and are now just starting to make relationships with Indigenous communities, but in a more formal way. But I will say that one of the deepest messages that we're trying to share is, and something that I've been involved with along the way, is around conservation and including Indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge in land conservation. So really resituating Indigenous hands on the land and taking those no trespassing signs down in our homelands. We're a hybrid land trust, as I mentioned, so we're using a unique approach that is getting folks on the land to be able to farm, but also really recognizing that farming in and of itself, it can be an extractive method and that we need to really be looking at regenerative solutions. We're also looking at land-based wealth redistribution, including something called rematriation of land. And again, we're working specifically to advance carbon drawdown by mandating regenerative agriculture methods in our ground leases. And our approach is a decentralized approach to leadership, meaning that we don't have a top-down structure. We have more of a cyclical structure that has taken a bit of inspiration from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Council's consensus building process. So as I mentioned, we are working on building Indigenous relationships and partnerships, and are starting to hear feedback about what communities want and what they need. One of those things is rematriation of land. I have here a quote from Michelle Shenandoah's project that was had some land rematriated to their project. Lizelle Haynes is the person who rematriated the land, and she says, "I have lived on Oneida lands for 43 years and inherited this land from my mother. When I heard Michelle talk about the Oneida women gathering on their homelands and their desire to have a place of their own, I knew this was the right thing to do." So considering that and just speaking out to an audience full of folks, I don't know who you are, but if that's something, if you have inherited generational wealth, inherited land, and are looking to build relationships, you might want to consider rematriating that land back to the nations on whose territories you occupy. In addition, we're advocating for other land trusts, farmer services organizations, conservation organizations to consult and partner with Indigenous nations when it comes to stewarding their own homelands. Additionally, we're starting to promote and build a process for something called a voluntary land tax. And that is for people who are occupying our homelands to recognize that and to pay a tax in order to build wealth in those communities. Another method that we're using in order to resituate Indigenous land stewardship is something called a cultural respect easement. This is a permanent easement that is placed on the title or deed of your land. And what it's doing basically is it's opening up access to that land to the original peoples who have stewarded those lands since time immemorial. The way that the easement works is that it's a legal agreement that is basically negotiated over a period of relationship building conversations and meetings that ultimately works out how the land will be engaged and any of the boundaries that the property owner has or that you have or that the First Nation might have. So some of the ways that you can work with a cultural respect easement is to open up access for hunting, for harvesting, for ceremony, for reburial, for agriculture, and for rites of passage. You can leave it even as simple as just open access. So it's a really wonderful way to start building relationships with folks and really getting to know the Indigenous community that you whose territory you occupy. One of the final ways that we're engaging Indigenous stewardship is through something called personhood or the rights of nature. Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer said in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, in the settler mind, land was property, real estate, capital, or natural resources. But to our people, it was everything. Identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home of our non-human kinfolk, our pharmacy, our library, the source of all that sustained us. And I would challenge to say that it still is the source of all that sustains us. So personhood is a way of recognizing something like the St. Lawrence River that is obviously sacred to our people and to Haudenosaunee, as well as a relative and a living being. It's actually a way to recognize that policy-wise, so you can actually protect that land through things like lawsuits. It's something that's a fairly new concept, but what you can see here behind this image, or the image behind these words, is a picture of wild rice. And wild rice has actually gained personhood status through the work of the Anishinaabe people. They've actually protected wild rice through this personhood. There have been rivers and mountains that have been granted personhood, and part of the work that we're doing as a land trust is to recognize personhood on the land holdings that we hold in our trust, as well as to advocate for personhood and facilitate that process for anybody who wants to engage us for that. So it's a fairly new concept, but we're really excited to talk about it and to dig into that work with the Earth Law Center. The next steps we have are to continue our consultation and to continue building bridges and building relationships with the various leadership across the Northeast and the various Indigenous nations across the Northeast. We're working on language justice. We're evolving a reparations map. We're trying to really just get the second phase of the land trust up and running. Ways that you can support us are just getting in touch. We have a webinar series that we're hosting. Be in touch, and we're specifically interested in collaborating and partnering with Indigenous communities to advance some of these concepts that we've been talking about up until now. And take a look, let us know if you have a question, feel free to get in touch with us. My email address is connect@nefoclandtrust.org. And in closing, I just wanted to share one of our inspirations, Fannie Lou Hamer, and something that she said, and she said it more simply than anything that I could say, and that's nobody's free until everybody's free. And until everybody's free, I'm going to continue working. So now go ahead, thanks for having me, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, Stephanie. Very good. Okay, we have one question that came for you. How has the Doctrine of Discovery affected land ownership and the privatization of land?
For me?
Yeah.
Okay.
How has the Doctrine of Discovery affected land ownership and the privatization of land?
The Doctrine of Discovery is one of the seeds that was planted that has created this land trust, basically. So looking at the idea and the concept of terra nullius is something that has deeply informed our work, especially regarding who the rightful stewards are of the land and who can quote unquote own land. Really, the Doctrine of Discovery is the catalyst for everything that's happened up until right now. And to see the St. Lawrence, to see Onondaga Lake, to see all of the Superfund sites that have been created based on the results of the spirit of the Doctrine of Discovery fuels me every single day. So the work is to dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, absolutely, and to get as many organizations and folks who have benefited from that to officially renounce the Doctrine of Discovery and to continue to challenge that. It is because of the spirit of that culture and that fed white supremacy culture and has fed the extractive and violent mechanisms that have created these health disparities amongst our people, as well as the extraction and silencing and erasure of our ways of being, doing, and knowing.
Okay, thank you. The land ownership and privatization, I think, really speaks back to the English property laws. And when you talk about the Doctrine of Discovery and the land trust, who actually does own the land that you have in the land trust?
Nobody owns the land, actually. And that's one of the things that I'll share. We don't believe that land can be owned, or water, or any other natural relative. What we can do is hold a legal title that's legal under colonial law. So I want to be very clear that there are two separate questions here. One is about ownership. I can't imagine owning a piece of land, even with a title written to me or a deed. I would imagine that owning land would be like owning a human being, which would mean that you were enslaving them. So to me, land ownership is it's a colonial Western concept that doesn't have any place in the work that we're doing. And one of the ways that we're trying to shift this conversation is about addressing that directly, that land ownership is a colonial concept. So when it comes to private land ownership, what we're doing is we are holding title and we're creating a governing body for each one of those deeds to oversee. So it's called a 501c3, 501c2, two-tiered community land trust that holds title and actually creates a board for each title holding that is made up of the community, the people living on the land, and part of our board. So it's quite an interesting mechanism to be able to create land access, but also hold accountability within that for values.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions that came in. One for Jackie. Jackie, are you still there? Yes.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay. How has COVID-19 affected the Akwesasne community?
In so many ways, but I'll stick to the discussions that we're having, and with the editorial that I wrote, it's almost all encompassing when we talk about the Doctrine of Discovery. So I'll stay focused on our environment. What really weighed on my mind when I found out that the EPA changed the plans last minute. I know Craig Arquette would know, like, they informed the community like over a year ago and then nothing happened. And because of this pandemic, they just completely canceled it and they didn't tell anyone, and they put pamphlets in a mailbox. And we know with the pandemic how slow our postage was. So people got these letters after the fact. And when they're looking at it, it was like, I went down to the west end of Kawanoge and I looked and I seen them already dredging the river. Like, I could stand on the west end just away from the parking lot of our water treatment plant and I could watch them dredging the Grass River. And because we're on a border, the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne on the Canadian side of Akwesasne, which is just across the river, they said they were upset because there was no consultation. And it's like, you even look at the maps what they give out in the mail, it literally shows like the contamination and it stops right at the border and they're drawn. Like, somehow that PCB just stops right at the border of this imaginary line and doesn't affect the Canadian side of Akwesasne. And it's the lack of consultation and communication on the EPA's part and on the tribal council's part, because they're ultimately they answer to the BIA, they answer to the US government. They're the extended hand of the US government, and they're taking part and they're helping them push this agenda. Like it's upsetting. And the fact that we only have one local newspaper that shares media, and so it's the lack of coverage and accountability on the EPA's part, the Grass River Remediation's part, the St. Regis Tribal Council's part. And I don't even know where I was going with this, to be honest.
No, you answered. Yeah, you answered the question. Yeah. They also asked about how the community was vulnerable to pandemics like COVID-19. Are a lot of people experiencing illness?
Surprisingly, we haven't been hit as hard as like the Navajos, who are, I heard they're taking the vaccine already because they've been hit so hard. And a lot of our young people and young parents won't even send their children back to school due to the fears of another outbreak, and we're highly against vaccinations, a lot of the parents. So the fact that they want all online, like even if you're all online, they want the students to have the vaccination. And it's things like that where our young parents are saying like, no, that's enough. We're not going to let our kids be guinea pigs like during the residential school and day school era. So we've taken it upon ourselves to homeschool our children. We're actually currently occupying land out in Dundee to get as far away from these industrial plants as we can. And that was like, that's because of the pandemic. Like it was like now or never, like we need to change something right now, because we're not going to send our kids back into these schools and allow this education system that was basically formed from the Doctrine of Discovery and residential schools, and to take the children from their parents and where we're supposed to be teaching our children. And right now we're starting to take that back. So I feel like the pandemic's been positive for us in a way, but it's trying to make people more aware that there is a different way, and we don't have to subject their kids to a COVID vaccine to send them to school so we can do a 9-to-5 job. Like that's all, like people have to understand the Doctrine of Discovery. That all comes from that, like that whole mindset. I think I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. Okay. So, thank you. Craig, how does the St. Regis Mohawk tribe monitor the Superfund sites?
How does the St. Regis Mohawk tribe monitor the Superfund sites?
Yeah,
that's I work for the tribe's environment division, and my job, I'm the environmental specialist, and what I do is whenever they're doing any work on the Superfund site, the General Motors site specifically, I'm there to make sure that the work that they're doing isn't impacting the community. And that also involves when the industry is ready, is planning on doing some work, they write up a plan of a work plan of what they're doing. Our office reviews it, and we have consultants to help us with some of the technical issues, and we comment and to EPA and with DEC, and we attend meetings with the industries to express our issues with what their each individual plan that's going to happen.
When you say the EPA, now that's the Environmental Protection Agency in the federal government, right?
Yes.
And the DEC is the Department of Environmental Conservation?
Yes.
And that's New York State, right? Yeah. Okay. So you have to work with the two different, the state government and the federal government with the monitoring.
Yes.
Okay. And then the other part of the question was how can the cleanup of the rivers be done? Is there any way possible to try to clean the rivers?
There's just two approach to cleaning up a river that has contaminated sediments and that is to do nothing and let put some material over the sediments, sand and gravel and large rocks, a series of layers to isolate it, to keep it from the wildlife, to the fish and benthic organisms. And the other approach is to excavate it. And that means just using equipment, construction equipment to excavators and just pull the sediments out of the river bottom. And but that has to be done in a way that you're trying to keep the suspended sediments in that area and not flowing downriver. And the idea of dredging is to get rid of that material, so it won't be impacting, continually releasing its contaminants. It'll be there if the sediments are left alone and the decision is to do nothing, then they're there. They may even get a covering of material, but it doesn't mean it ends. It means it just prolongs it. It just really just covering up the issue. It's gonna resurface down the road with some event. Rivers are dynamic. And so if we just put a cover over it and do nothing, that kind of isolates it for now, for that first time period. But then you're just sending that problem down the road for future generations. They'll get hit with it in large dose if there's river bottom is disturbed some way. And so the idea with dredging is to get that bulk material out. It's messy work, and it does stir up contaminants in the immediate area. But down the road, it's less material that could resurface and recontaminate the system for future generations. So these are just broad views of river cleanup. There's a lot of perspectives for each approach. So and I'm willing to discuss this more offline to anyone. So yes, please reach out to me. I love to share ideas and what your perspective is and where you're coming from. I like to understand that more. So
Thank you. Thank you. I know on our reservation at Cattaraugus, we're downstream from this West Valley nuclear waste site, and the Cattaraugus Creek, which runs through our reservation, is carrying all kinds of radiation. There was a Superfund site also in Gowanda on the river, the Peter Cooper site, which was a tannery, and a lot of sediment had gone into there. And we were dredging for a while. The water, though, that comes down the Cattaraugus Creek goes into Lake Erie, then it goes into the water intake for Erie County. So the scientists have looked at the radiation contamination and found several on the other side of the falls. Radiation has radiation been found in any of the waters at Akwesasne?
no, it hasn't. And I'm glad. We if anything, we looked out on that, and I'm sorry that you have that. I don't know. I don't have any idea how to even try and address that in contaminated sediments, nuclear contaminated sediments. That's a difficult issue.
Because in the around in the 50s or 60s, they put the two nuclear plants in Oswego, New York, and there's a lot of radiation coming off of those plants as well. And when they gave us the report about the radiation, the people around the whole Great Lakes is really looking at, yeah, we have a nuke in Sandusky, and then there's the two nukes in Oswego. So there's a lot of concern, and you guys are downstream, but somebody did say there was contamination in the St. Lawrence River. So that's why I was wondering if that had been detected on the Akwesasne Reservation.
It would be news to me.
You need a Geiger counter.
We have one in our office.
And you know, the whole thing about the water and the contamination, and then, you know, trying to find fresh drinking water for people that are on affected lands, contaminated lands, is a really big issue in Indian country as well. So Jackie, do you know of any of the other problems with the land or the water in terms of radiation?
I can talk about a future issue that I come across. I'm not sure about the American side, but the Canadian side.
Right.
So we have this seaway claim coming up, and it was supposed to come shortly after the Dundee referendum happened, but it was stalled because a lot of us appealed the Dundee land surrender. So with the seaway, I was able to get one of the Band Council district chiefs to confirm that the seaway had wanted to expand. They wanted to dig into our river and expand the seaway and raise our bridge. And we have become informed about what super tankers are. They're these bigger ships, and we were trying to wrap our minds about, like, why do they need bigger ships coming through our waters? Because we already know the Mi'kmaq, they've already raised their bridge, and then Kahnawake is already talking about being relocated, and we're the third lock in. So I've come across information, because they're canceling pipelines a lot, like in Standing Rock, and everyone's celebrating, but if you really look into it, it's a failing economy. And what Canada's doing is they're looking into rare earth elements, and they have 40% of the world's rare earth elements. So it's unregulated and it's new, and they're starting to explore places. And of course, it's near reservations. Like in Osadag, there's a mine that they're re-exploring out there for these rare earth elements. And then I found out it exposes us to naturally occurring radiation. So when they do find these elements, which they're trying to get, like uranium and like those type of things, how are they going to transport? You know what I mean? Like, they're going to probably put them in these ships, and they're going to be traveling through our waters. And so one ship gets stuck, or like, I don't know what, spills in our water, and then we have to deal with that. And that's something that's going to be coming up very soon, because they're actively exploring Turtle Island right now for these elements and to get their hands on more uranium.
Mm-hmm.
But that's in Canada. I'm not sure if it's in the United States, if you can find more information on that.
Yep. We've got a lot of, well, nationally, the Nuclear Information Resource Center in Washington, D.C., with Diane Dorigo has been working with us on the West Valley. When we're trying to get full cleanup of that, usually, you know, with the waste, they solidify it. But with this, and then just trying to get national and international, get them to stop producing more waste. And, you know, that really is a big issue because they're really looking at, as the fossil fuel industry is declining, they're really looking at nuclear to replace, which is even more dangerous and more of an immediate threat to our communities. So we need people to do that. We have a couple more, a general question for any one of you. Can college students create a fundraiser or help with the donations? Is there a way to do that?
I guess it depends on what donations you're talking about.
Well, for
It's a good
the
idea.
land trust, or if college students wanted to do a fundraiser at their institution, does your organization accept donations?
Our organization absolutely accepts donations, and we also raise money for initiatives like this. So we're doing something called, we actually just finished our first webinar series where we brought on different subject experts that have been helping us work out the land trust details. And each one of those webinars is a way to generate money in order to be able to feed those initiatives. So not our specific initiatives, but having a webinar about something like this, I think would be really valuable. And then all funds would be directed toward if there's a nonprofit, or if there's a way to channel the funding into the community to specific programming to help with this. That's absolutely something that NEFOC Land Trust is happy to do. We receive donations as well, but I would want to defer that to just being a pass-through organization to help support this initiative.
Ooh. Okay, how about at Akwesasne? Is there any donations needed there?
For sure. We're in our 4th week of the land occupation out in what they call Dundee or Agrilar-Izzo. It's what I talked about, that land claim referendum where Canada kind of had an underhanded deal and tried to make us surrender our title, even though they're giving us money because we never surrendered our land. So we're out there right now and we're doing a land back language camp with the young people that aren't going back to school. So we're trying to, like myself, I'm trying to learn the language alongside my children. So we're out there on the land, and it's good hunting ground where we are. Like right now, the young men we're bringing out there to do hunting. So we have community Akwesasne here that are doing online auctions. We have like a raffle going on because they seized a vehicle at the border, like to raise the money back because it cost $1,000 to get our vehicle back. And little things like that. I welcome anybody to do a fundraiser, and we have a email account like the gmail.com is where a lot of people have been sending their donations. We have t-shirts, like we have all kinds of different things you can find on our Facebook site for the land back language camp. And
what's the name of the Facebook site?
Kaniatarowanénhne land back language camp.
Okay, so you need to spell it.
KANIENKEHAKA.
Okay.
I think I did that right. Then it's just
Okay.
land back language camp.
Land back language camp. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Someone can write it
Okay.
in the chat so people can take it
Yeah.
off from there.
Okay. Yeah, put it in the chat. And then Greg, how about donations? Is the tribe in need of any fundraisers or donations?
Jackie's
In your
call
department?
sounds pretty good. To direct people to that one.
Okay. Okay, that's good. And I think we have one more general question. Let's see here. It was here, but I don't see it anymore. Okay, here it is. Can someone give us a brief description of the Doctrine of Discovery and its history?
Who wants to go first?
I think that's
Who
you.
wants to go first? Well, I guess I'll try. I'll start a little bit. The Doctrine of Discovery is actually U.S. law. And I had written down a date when it kind of came into being, and it's kind of been developing. It started in this notion from the papal bulls of the 15th century. And in the papal bulls, they had papal bulls for Africa and papal bulls for North America. And it basically says that if you're not Christian, you can be killed, and your land can be, and your property can be seized by the European explorers. And, you know, basically this is what was done when Christopher Columbus came and set down. And it's been ingrained, this notion that the European kingdoms were superior to, and the people of Europe were superior to people in Africa and people to, which, you know, really is the foundation of slavery and is part of the foundation of the invisibility. I think that's what we've been hearing today, you know, the invisibility of Native North America, because there's been many things told to us, you know, that the land was vacant, terra nullius, you know, that idea, there's nothing here. You know, when there were millions of people that were here prior to contact. And if somebody else would like to jump in, I would really appreciate that. Talk a little bit more about the Doctrine of Discovery.
I can say a few things because I was surprised to find out that it's only been like common, like public knowledge in since the 90s, like 30 years. I was born in 88. So my lifetime, I grew up knowing about this because I come from a family of like activism and like traditional, we know our culture and our language and our beliefs. And I'm very fortunate that I grew up with this knowledge, but it was surprising to find out that not everybody knows what the Doctrine of Discovery is, and like patriarchy and assimilation and genocide and how that was all passed down and continues to be passed down. So what stuck out to me the most when I was about 16 and I learned about this was how they looked at us like a subhuman species. How they call us a band of Indians is equivalent to like a herd of deer. We were not equal to them as human beings. We were in between them and animals. So that was how they were able to justify committing genocide on us, just like they killed off all the buffalo. They, you know, it was like equal in their eyes. They just were killing off a herd of animals and were removing us to take our land. And then the way they treat the land is just the same. Like all the industrial contamination here in Akwesasne is just, it's a prime example of how they treat our people, how they treat our land. And then like how the silence you say, how they went into bankruptcy and nobody held them accountable, and how the tribe had to take it upon themselves to clean it up and make better standards because theirs was 10 parts per million and ours was 1. So they deem that is that's safe for us because we're not human in their eyes. They could care less how that affects our people. We're downriver from that, you know, like it's so ingrained in the belief system, even throughout our own people, like to be submissive and to just take it for what it is and not question it, because the education system has like, you know, instilled in us since residential school that we just obey, we listen to what's said and we accept it for the truth and we don't question it. So that now whenever these things are coming up and the young people are like saying, why is it like this? Why can't we drink our water and fish in our rivers and eat our fish more than once a month? And now we're like upset because how did we let it get to this? And it's because the older people were disconnected from our land and put in residential schools because they tried to assimilate us and they couldn't until they ripped us from our parents' arms. And what those children brought back from that residential school and that patriarchal way of thinking that came from the Doctrine of Discovery, they brought back home to us and they carried it with them. So now we're just beginning to heal, like our dudas and my parents' generation, they carry it with them, whether they realize it or not. Like I have a friend who moved into her grandmother's yard and they have a big glass pit and like they buried it in their yards because they didn't know better to put like glass and garbage and just dump it in their backyards and bury it there. And then we dig it up and find this big pit of glass. Like, why would they do that? But they didn't know better because they're disconnected from the land, which resulted from residential school, which resulted from the Doctrine of Discovery. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Thank you. So just in closing here, do any of you, Craig, Jackie, or Stephanie, do you have any thoughts for the future that you'd like to share with our audience?
I can start. Thoughts for the future. Yes, I guess for the people listening in is that in your community, whether, you know, wherever you are, if you're on tribal lands or not, if you're disliking how things are, you know, you just don't sit back. You know, there's probably organizations in your community that are doing something. Just find out, you just ask around. You probably find something that to your liking. There's a lot of, for example, there's agriculture, you know, groups and a lot of communities, and there's nonprofits, and you can just get involved, and they're all doing good things. And if there isn't something going on, you know, that's to your liking, that's near and dear to your heart, then start something yourself. You know, you be that one to get things going, even if it's just you being active in it, then you're still doing something. And yeah, that's it. Is take action yourself, work for your community, for your people. You know.
Thank you. How about Stephanie and Jackie? You got any thoughts for the future?
I would definitely uplift what Greg just said. This is not a time to theorize anymore. This is the time to act. It's been the time to act for a really long time. We have to build relationships with each other and understand these root causes. I saw somebody in the chat ask about what the word justice means to me, or what the word justice means for us in general. And I would say that justice is what I would really want to promote, this concept of actionable justice and actionable liberation. We're not looking at, you know, this isn't just about lawsuits. It isn't just about, you know, one person's health. It's not actually an individualistic journey for any of us anymore, right? That's a Western concept, that individualism. This is about collectively building a new future together, a future for our faces to come. We are the ones who are responsible for that. We are responsible to the land, to the water, to each other. And we're in a long line of ancestors ourselves that, you know, we're preparing these spaces for the faces to come. So we can't wait any longer. There's individual action, but the collective action is really where I would suggest, you know, getting in touch and putting your power behind whatever that power is for you, behind these movements. This is the time. The time is now. There is no more time. What happens in the next year is literally going to make or break the lives of our future generations. So we're here for it. We're here for it for all of you. Yala.
Yeah. Okay, Jackie, any thoughts for the future?
Yeah, I agree with what they both said. And what came to mind was a story, and it's most definitely relevant to what people are going to do in the future, because we're at the land back camp, and it's just myself and my family most of the time. And we made the move as a clan, the clan I come from. And I talked to allies that came to visit, and they told me this story that really stuck out, because I was really starting to wonder, like, where is everybody? Like, why is it just us here? Like, people are coming to visit, but nobody's made the move on the land like we did. So they told me a story about the Wet'suwet'en, like Frida, and where they're out in Unistoten, and how it all started off with Frida and her man, and it was just them two there. That's all it took, and look at what that turned into. It doesn't take, you don't have to wait for a big group of people. If you, like Greg said, do something yourself if you can't find it, because one person is powerful. Like, my husband was crazy enough to marry me, and he's been like going along the ride with me, but you know, that's all it takes, is that one person to say, I'm going to do it. And then once you do it and people see that it can be done, they'll be right there to support you, and they'll be right there behind you, if not beside you. So don't, like she said, time is of the essence. You can't wait any longer. Whatever you feel in your heart that you need to do it. And just know that there's the support.
Good, very good invitation. One of the things in our ways, our longhouse ways, is you know, not believing in the force or telling people what they should or should not do. But this is an invitation to all of you that are listening tonight to take some action in your own community. Think locally, work locally, and think globally, because this affects everyone. And I just want to sum up tonight by thanking you all for great presentations, very informative. I had a hard time keeping up. Took copious notes here. And this production will be put up on the website. I'll leave that up to our hosts to let you know where you can view this webinar in the future. So I'd like to turn it back now to Blake and Blitzen, and just thank everybody for coming tonight and for listening and for taking good care of our mother, the earth. Are they there? All right.
Not to reiterate too much all the amazing and powerful words that you all said, but Niowa, thank you so much to you, Agnes, for moderating this conversation, for helping weave together these very extremely vital topics for all of us, for all of our communities and for the world. And thank you to you all, panelists, for sharing your experience, your knowledge, everything that you decided to take the time and share with us tonight.
And we would also like to thank you, audience, for all your questions and contributions.
Also wanted to, if you haven't seen it in the chat, wanted to let you all know that you are getting lots of thanks there. From Himani, thank you everyone so much for this insightful discussion. From Holly Thompson, Niowa, to all tonight peace. From Michael Twist, thank you for sharing your words, experience, and time with us. And one last thing we wanted to mention was before, in the very beginning of the discussion, there was a question specifically to you, Kayatidake, which is, it would be great to get that editorial of yours in local white, in quotation marks, newspapers, because everyone needs to learn. This is something that all of our communities need to work together and share. So we hope to see you next time. We will be having our next panel discussion next week, 6:30 p.m. Wednesday, the 30th of September. It's going to be the environmental future of the St. Lawrence watershed. Right now, we talked about all the issues are facing us now, and you all ended this discussion talking about our future. So yes, that conversation is going to continue in our next iteration. If you want to see this recording, it will be available on nocoenvironment.org. It's going to be available on our YouTube page, so anyone can watch this again, share it with friends and family, because this message needs to spread. And if you want to contact our panelists, we will be putting up a flyer with our email. So if you want to reach anybody, you can also reach out to us, and we will share any comments, contributions, anything with the panelists here tonight.
And so we hope you enjoyed tonight, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Skogeai.
You know what?
Ona.
Ona. Ona, good night.
Skogeai.